hopefully everyone can see that, and you will probably have a reduced number of people on the screen. So welcome everyone. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where I am this evening, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We've had another amazing result with this webinar. As I said, over 1,100 registrations. Our first webinar that was on the importance of advanced care planning had 350 participants. And when I last checked, 1,200 people had watched the recording. Then our second one in this series on empowering the elderly had 550 participants, and over 650 people have watched that recording in just the last 2 months. This webinar this evening is titled End of Life Doulas, Bridging the Gaps in Care. And as I said, we've had over 1,100, and so far, just looking at the numbers, no, can't see the numbers. Oh yes, 250 people so far, but they're still coming in. So some of the people that have registered knew they wouldn't be able to take part tonight, but we will be recording this event. The recording has already started. And as soon as I can edit the video, we will make sure that we send a link to everyone who's on tonight, so that if you have to leave early or you want to just look at it again or you want to share it with friends, you'll be able to do that. I'll just move my next. So although, you know, some people watching this webinar may be very accustomed to talking about end-of-life care, including obviously our guest speakers, but a lot of you as well, I know, it is still possible that some of you may find parts of the presentation upsetting. So if anything we talk about this evening does raise distressing issues for you and you need to talk to someone, please do call a support line. There's Lifeline, which is 131114, and Beyond Blue 1300 224 636, or any other counselling service that you may be able to access. So over the past century, death has become more medicalised in our Western society. The truth is, death is not a medical event. It is a profoundly personal, individual, family and community event. Where once we would have cared for our ageing and dying at home, these days our elders are cared for in aged care facilities and hospitals, which can often contribute to an isolated, lonely and disempowered end of life. We're very lucky to have 3 very experienced guest speakers. All the 3 ladies are end-of-life doulas. Before I start and introduce Helen and Jancine and Carolyn, we will have a Q&A at the end, so we won't be taking live questions, but if you'd like to put your questions in the chat, you can do that throughout the first introduction, which will be presentations from the 3 ladies. We do already have some questions to start, but feel free to add your questions in the chat. Helen Callanan is a practicing end-of-life doula and the founder, managing director and lead educator of Preparing the Way. Trained in traditional Chinese medicine and Reiki, and with more than 30 years experience working with the very ill and dying, Helen has deep insight into health and healing. The long-term care and death experiences of her parents, family, friends, and many clients, alongside her passion for education that transforms, led Helen to establishing Preparing the Way in 2014 and bring her wealth of knowledge to hundreds of doulas, clients, and their families and those close to them. Jancine Hurst is an end-of-life doula on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, specialising in holistic end-of-life and after-death care. She supports those nearing end of life and their families by sharing available options so they can make end-of-life choices that best align with their values and preferences. With a background spanning over 30 years in childcare, aged care and end-of-life care, Jancine understands that it takes courage and compassion to lean into life-limiting, terminal and ageing illnesses. Carolyn Vaughan is a practicing end-of-life doula in the Illawarra region of New South Wales. Her work is informed and enriched by qualifications in early childhood education, aged care, somatics therapy and ongoing study in end-of-life care. Carolyn uses her extensive lived and professional experience and skill to engage with communities and individuals, inspiring conversations that explore the topics of death and dying and the choices and decisions that we can make to enhance and honour our end-of-life journey. I'll now hand over I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to Carolyn so she can provide her introduction on our topic this evening, end-of-life doulas, bridging the gaps in care. And then we'll hear from Helen and Jancine before coming back to me for the Q&A session. So over to you, Carolyn.
Beautiful. Thanks, Shane. And welcome to everyone. I'm coming to you from Dharawal land, the land of the Wadi Wadi people. So I pay my respects to them and their elders, past and present, and to anyone here tonight. What I'd like to do is begin tonight just to put a little bit of a context around our conversation by talking about two different situations to end-of-life journeys. The end-of-life journeys of both of my parents that were vastly different. My father, Brian, very stoic man, very independent, family provider, very fixed in many of his ways. He was my mother's carer. And my father was diagnosed in 2013 with quite an aggressive form of leukemia. My sister and I didn't actually find out that he had that diagnosis until the following year when he let it slip in a conversation. And he must have been ready, I guess, in some ways to have that conversation with us as a family. At that point in time, I had absolutely no knowledge or awareness of end-of-life doulas at that point in time. I was living 2 hours away from my father, so he managed most of his own medical appointments on his own, transporting himself. It was amazing. We didn't have any other family who lived close by to him to support us. And when his illness took over his health in roughly January 15, he was admitted to hospital and he never came home. He had amazing medical support, but however, for us as a family, there was minimal communication from medical staff about his continually deteriorating health. And a lot of, I guess, from us, fear or concern or not being sure about the fact that we could ask those questions of medical staff as well. So for us, it was all a new journey. We'd never experienced this before. And not empowered, I guess, in any way to ask the important questions that we needed answers to. We had an urgent phone call one morning to come quickly, and quickly was like quickly. And the result of that call gave me 20 minutes with my father, who was struggling to catch his breath, and he died in my arms. And my last moments with my father were in a hospital room, in ICU, on his own. We had no opportunity at that point in time to engage in any after death care. We had no opportunity to be able to spend time with him because the pressure on the hospital system meant that someone else needed that room and that bed and the staff that were associated with that. There was no offering also of time from the funeral home to come and spend time with him after he had died and engage in any type of bathing or dressing or being able to spend time with him. That whole time for us as a family unit was a really lonely journey and largely focused on and revolved around the medical aspects of his care. And definitely not the beauty of the human being, which was a sad loss. In hindsight, I think as a family, we missed many opportunities to have conversations, to talk about his life with him and his dreams and his wishes for my mum, to speak of the love of his family. We were unaware of his declining health. And it left us actually with a lot of questions to ask around what happened in this scenario. Why did it have to happen this way? And for me, questions around how could this be different for someone else, given that it had had such an effect on us as individuals and an effect on my mum. It was, I guess, all of that reflection and a lot of asking questions that led me into this field of work and coming across and meeting Helen and ensuing with that training as we went along. 2 years after my father's death, my mother's health began to deteriorate and she required additional support and care. She was living in Sydney and I lived down the south coast. So we had a 2-hour drive backwards and forwards. And I didn't know of anyone up there at that point in time who could provide her with support. the support that she needed for medical appointments. So we moved her down to a local aged care facility down here where she was able to age in place. So she was actually able to stay there until her point of death, which was lovely. 6 months after she arrived, we had a diagnosis of metastatic melanoma, stage 4. And stage 4 you don't return from. So it was basically the diagnosis of a life-limiting illness. So after we'd recovered from hearing the shock of those words, she and I sat down together and we talked about what this journey from this point on could look like, given that my father's journey had been such a medically focused event. So we sat down, we had many conversations. She shared with me her wishes for her end-of-life journey, her want for support and for collaboration with medical services and to be really well informed and continually consulted with along the way about her choices and what her available options were for care, particularly at end of life. For my mother to be able to actually sit down and have that conversation and for us to engage in that, map out everything that was going to happen for the next 12 months. So in that space, I, in effect, became her end-of-life doula, and we travelled that journey together, very different from my father's journey. The presence, I think, of that role gave her back choice. It gave her back the capacity and control in decision-making, which she really wanted. She wanted to be able to make those decisions for herself. It meant that she also had an advocate in me in terms of her being able to have clear voice in any decisions that were being made and wishes for her own care at every point along that trajectory, right through to end of life, and also in her case, after her death, which is possible. So as her doula, what I did was I attended her medical appointments, all of her treatment sessions. I made notes for her and recorded information because she was affected by medication and wasn't always able to remember what she'd been told. And as part of that process, what I also did was become the key person that shared that information with all of the medical services that were involved in her care, including the aged care facility, so that everyone was on the same page and everyone was aware of her needs. It also meant that I was able to engage with the aged care staff in that facility. We worked alongside each other throughout my mother's end of life, and we were able to share her needs, her dietary needs, changes in equipment that she needed, and changes in medical support. And they were incredibly supportive working in that space with us to make sure that her needs were met. She had consistent support for all her medical appointments and treatment, someone to hold a constant care role throughout her journey, and someone who could collaborate with medical staff around her needs. And for doulas, what we do is call that authentic continuity of care. There was one person that was the thread through that entire journey. No one needed to retell a story. No one needed to re-traumatize themselves around what was happening. There was one person who could carry that story for her. So we completed advanced care directives. We sat down and had a look at all of her legal paperwork and reviewed all of that documentation so that she felt comfortable that it was up to date. She didn't change anything, but she wanted to make sure that it was current and that it was useful when we were dealing with the situation after her death. In becoming an advocate for facility staff, what we actually did, I think, was perhaps change some of the staff's views on what end of life could look like. What we did was we placed signs on her door that welcomed people in. I had staff who would continually close my mother's door because she was dying, and I would continually open the door and invite people in and come and invite them to come and spend 5 minutes with her. And we actually had a stream of staff coming in and out before and after shift, just popping in to say, "Hi, Joan, it's Jessie here. I just wanted to say hello. I'll pop back later." And from Mum's physical responses, she delighted in that contact. She designed her own room. She had fairy lights. We had photos on the walls. She had oil infusing the air. She had the music that she loved playing because we'd sat down and had the conversations about what she wanted, not what anyone else wanted. The day she died, we had many hours with her. We bathed her, we brushed her hair, we sat and talked to her. My daughter came in and spent time with her. When it came time to leave the facility, I walked my mother out, not general staff. When she was walked through a guard of honour, I placed her in the mortuary van and I followed her back to the mortuary and took her out of the van, cared for her for another hour before placing her in the cooling facilities and giving her a kiss goodnight. In the following days, we bathed her again, we shrouded her for her funeral, exactly following her requests, because someone had asked her the questions, because someone had supported her in being able to come forward and share that. So we had, on reflection, two incredibly different journeys, two vastly different journeys, one with very much a focus on the medical aspect. And I acknowledge the fact that at that point in time as a family, we didn't even know we could ask questions. We didn't feel confident enough asking, challenging, querying information that had come from other service providers, because we weren't supported to be advocates for my dad. And that's something that I think that has vastly grown for me through this journey. Now it's advocacy and support for people so that they do have those choices and they do have the capacity and the control put back into their own hands, so that they're in charge of their own journey. So that's what I wanted to share, just to start us off in conversation. Thank you. Thanks, Shane.
Thanks, Carolyn. Hi, everyone. I'm Helen, and I'm so grateful. Carolyn, thank you for sharing. I know they're two deeply close to your heart stories, and who can relate to what Carolyn's sharing? Like, have you had some sort of a journey a bit like that? I know I certainly have. Some in the really deep in the medical system, and then other things, other experiences that are amazing. And thank you so much, Carolyn, for being willing to share those. I think as an end-of-life doula, and we, of course, at Preparing the Way, that's what we do. We lead training in that. But as end-of-life doulas, we've got a bit of a focus, and you've heard Carolyn share, a number of examples of how end-of-life doula. Now, she was doing that for her person, for her precious person in her life. As end-of-life doulas, we do that for people that we maybe don't have that close relationship with. And I've certainly worked myself, and I know that Jancine is going to share. I also know Carolyn too. We've worked with a lot of people in families who are and supporting people. So I want to talk to you a little bit, if you like, sort of helicopter up a little bit, from the big picture and into the big picture. And as Carolyn shared, end of life, aging, end of life and grieving are very deep, profound personal experiences, right? They're not medical experiences. They're not experiences that belong, in a hospital. Doesn't mean we may not need medical care sometimes. Of course we do. And that's all great, but it's not only that. We've got families, we've got personal preferences. End-of-life doulas are about giving people back, as Carolyn mentioned, choice, capacity, and control. And we're about having someone who walks alongside you on a journey that you're on, or that a person is on, or their family, and providing support, education, resources. And I've got one slide to show you. I promise you, only one slide the whole night we're going to show. We're not going to kill you with PowerPoint tonight. So I've got one slide to show you that I'm going to do my best to post now for you. And I want to talk you through where we say as end-of-life doulas we work across this model of what we call the stages of life. Okay, can everyone see that okay? Give me a heads up if you can. Yep, great, awesome. So this is what we call our end-of-life doula. That's what EOLD is, model of care. By the way, doula is a Greek word. And it originally meant slave, but we've upgraded it a bit now to person of service, right? And we have male and female end-of-life doulas. And as Carolyn pointed to in her stories, doulas provide authentic continuity of care. So how does that look? And we work at Preparing the Way, and we teach inside this model of 10 stages. And I just want to acknowledge down in the bottom left corner, you'll see a logo from Natural Grace. So Natural Grace are holistic funeral guides, funeral directors, who we work very closely with, and they're very much a part of our training. They're very much a part of our Cert 4 in End of Life Doulas services. And this model actually comes from them, and I want to speak to it. So let's imagine so two things out of this. One is that where do we work with people as End of Life Doulas? What do we actually do? Well, the first thing is, as an End of Life Doula, I work with people in every one of these stages. And I'm going to speak to that in a moment. But let's look at these stages. So let's imagine I'm a human being like you. I'm living my life. I'm going along, and I'm not particularly old yet, but I'm just living my life. But maybe I'm planning to go overseas, or maybe I've had children, or maybe I've got elderly parents, and I go, oh my goodness, I need to get my plans in place. So I'm still living well. There's nothing wrong. I haven't got any diagnosis. I'm living well, but I need to make plans for myself or someone I care about, right? So that's living well. And I work with people there. I work with people who are totally fine and who want to make those plans. Then stage 2 happens. Maybe I notice a lump. I go to a doctor. I go and have all of these tests done, and I'm working then with the diagnostic team. And or maybe I'm advancing in age, whatever, but there's something happening in my health or whatever is starting to be compromised in some way. So I work with people there. Stage 3, I'm living with my life-limiting illness. I've had some sort of a diagnosis, and I've entered a treatment team. So my diagnostic team have finished. Maybe now I'm working with a treatment team, and I might be having some sort of treatment or whatever. Then after a period of time, and I'm just living with that, I'm doing my best through that time, but then eventually the treatment I'm having may stop working. So maybe then I enter stage 4, palliative care. So my treatment team drop off. Now I've got a whole new team. I've got a whole new team of palliative care, which is so great. We work closely with palliative care. But then finally the palliative care, I'm approaching end of life, whether it's through aging or illness. And I enter that sort of final stage of life, which is a set of common signs and symptoms that would suggest that I've entered the active dying stage. And that's those last stages where there's a whole lot of different things going on. So as a doula, I work with people in that stage. But then finally, I die. Death occurs, I die. Then my family, so all the palliative care team drop off. Now my family engage another team, which is the funeral team. So then a whole nother group of people enter the picture. And maybe I'm having after death care, maybe at home, maybe the place, maybe I go to a funeral director's, whatever I choose. Maybe there's vigil and ceremony, but then we're planning my funeral, memorial or celebration. Then my body is going to be returned to the elements. And then my family, because I'm going to have been, I'm all done and the funeral team have dropped off. Now my family are left with a hole where I used to be. And also that they're now navigating a whole new future. So as an end-of-life doula, and this is what I wanted to share, that as an end-of-life doula, apart from family, like Carolyn shared that all through stages 1 through 10, Carolyn was accompanying her mother. Her father, bit of a different story, right? Do you see the parallel there? So as an end-of-life doula, this is the only other role I know of, apart from family, that actually can accompany a human being all the way through all those stages. And that is the key around end-of-life doulas, what we do, who we are. It's about being alongside someone on the journey they're on, right? You know, in the West, we live a bit like it's life versus death, right? That death is this thing, we've got to keep it at bay. We can't talk about it because it's dangerous. I've got something to share with you. And it's a bit of a joke, but it's the truth. Just like you can't get pregnant by talking about it, you've got to be doing something else to get pregnant, right? You can't die by talking about it. Otherwise, I would have been dead a damn long time ago, right? You can't die from it. So we've got to be talking about this more. But end of life in the West, we live a bit like it's life versus death, right? Rather than, now think about it. Life is not the opposite of death. What's the opposite of death? Birth. So a life, a full life, a whole circle of life has birth in it and it has death in it. They're actually two of its aspects. And then there's many others. Some people, even some of the beings actually die in utero, right? While they're still being carried inside their mama. And that's a tragedy. Then some people die only when they've been here a few breaths or a short time. And some people live like 100 beyond, right? As Shane was sharing earlier tonight, right? There's someone that you were working with, Shane. So do you get what I'm saying? Like there's this circle of life. And as End of Life Doulas, we want to focus on life because there's future. Even when a diagnosis happens, it's like, okay, well, what's your future? What is the future you want to create? Maybe what's on your bucket list? Maybe what choices do you want to make? What do you want to happen for your family? After you've died, what do you want to happen? And, you know, as an end-of-life doula, we're able to support people fulfill what's important to them. And how we talk about advocacy, you know, Carolyn talked about that, and Jancine, I know, will talk about that when she's actually speaking in a moment. That it's advocacy is so critical because here's the thing, life happens, stuff happens. So what if something happened to you and you could no longer speak for yourself? Who would you want to speak for you? What would you want them to say? And there's paperwork and things. And so an end-of-life doula can help people get that paperwork to have your voice speak for you, even if you can no longer physically speak. We can do that. There's also so much that can happen now. People have choices and options, but they don't know. And as an end-of-life doula, we're non-medical, non-clinical. So we're not doing that. That's the purview of medical and nursing staff. That's their thing. What we're doing is talking about giving people back, as Carolyn mentioned, choice, capacity, and control. So what does that look like? Because here's the fact, people, that as a person is aging, advancing in age, or as they are living with a life-limiting illness and their illness is progressing, that as that happens, that your choice, capacity, and control are either diminishing organically or they are taken from you. And that's a fact. So end-of-life doulas are about giving people back choice, capacity, and control, because the reality is you are the expert in your life, not me, not a doctor, not anybody else, you. What are your choices and preferences? What actually is of value to you? What are your values? What is it that you want or don't want? Do you get what I'm saying? So it's really about giving people back choice, capacity, and control, as is the whole, I mean, if you think about the whole ethos of dying with dignity, surely that is at the crux of it, right, is giving people back those things. So we talk about the circle of life as end-of-life doulas. We talk about continuity of care. We talk about those 10 steps, and that we can actually authentically provide that continuity of care through every one of those stages. That we talk about that life is a full thing, and that birth is a part of that life, death is a part of that life. But that life is the full circle, and that's where we're focusing on people having the very best quality of life and getting to make the choices they want to make, that you want to make in your world. And, you know, hands up, who's a baby boomer? I'm one. Anyone born between 46 and 64? Okay, we're it. Probably a number of people on here. So guess what? The stats are astounding. So already we are the biggest part of the demographic on the planet. Right? Not just Australia, but on the planet. So therefore, it follows there's a wave of aging, dying, and death coming, the likes of which has never been seen. Now, there's already insufficient hospital beds, palliative care beds, aged care beds, hospice beds, right? So therefore, death has to go back into our communities. It actually has to, back into our own homes, like it used to be, up to about 100 years ago, when we outsourced death and dying. We sent it to funeral directors and hospitals. We've got to go back into the community. And there's no actual problem with the fact that we gave away our outsourced our end of life and funeral and after death care and aging care and grieving care. There's actually no problem with that. But there was a cost. And the cost was when we gave that over, we lost our confidence and our capacity as community, as families, as people, as ordinary people, to be able to actually support people at home, to be able to provide that care and support to our aging, our dying, and our grieving folk. So we're about End of Life Doulas are about bringing it all back home, bringing it back to where you need to be and being there with you, providing you the support. We champion people. We're like, you know what, we got you and you've got this and we've got you. And that's really, a big part of what it's about. And I think that's going to probably give me a good time now to segue over to Jancine, who's got some great information to share with you about really what's available after death, because I think this is really valid in the VAD space, but also in just your choices for you and your life at the end of your life. Over to you, Jancine. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Hi, everyone. I want to start first by acknowledging the Sunshine Coast country, so the home of the Gubbi Gubbi and the Jinnaburra people, the traditional custodians whose lands and waters we on the Sunshine Coast all now share. And I wish to pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge the important role First Nations people continue to play within the Sunshine Coast community. So what I'm choosing to share with you in my role as End of Life Doula today is my perspective, and it comes from my own lived client experiences. And this may not necessarily be the perspective of other End of Life Doulas, so it's important that you continue to explore what End of Life Doula may mean for you. Okay, so I believe End of Life Doula is a service of humility, and we do this with deep respect for the person at end of life and their family. It's an absolute honor to walk beside people as they navigate their end of life, and they do this in a very individual way. So Jackie Morgan, who's the beautiful and very talented holistic mortician and funeral director at Natural Grace in Victoria, shares that people are as individual in death as they are in life. And I'd like to extend that to say that people are as individual in their end of life as they are in life and in death. So two people may have the same diagnosis, they may have the same prognosis, and they may decide on a similar treatment plan, and their outcomes may be vastly different because of many factors beyond just medical. And this can include the planning that they do, their network of support, complex family dynamics, and the engagement of an end-of-life doula. So as an end-of-life doula, where do I start? So generally, I start by having a conversation with the person who has reached out. And that's not necessarily the person who's aging or has a life-limiting or terminal illness. Quite often, it's a family member who feels that they need support and guidance. And so whoever that person is, we generally chat about circumstances, about what their expectations for engaging an end-of-life doula might look like. And when we agree to work together, again, it's as individual as the person. No two people and no two families that I've worked with ever follow the same formula. It's always very, very different. I often meet people where they're at, and we go from there. And people can be in very different spaces and places when we meet. And it might take many meetings before they're ready for these really hard conversations that we have as doulas. So these hard conversations are so important because it's these hard conversations that many of the answers lie within. And many doulas say that they create a safe space for families to have these hard conversations, but I say that we create a brave space. And the reason being that a safe space is, again, it's about perspective. So what may feel safe for me may not necessarily feel safe for you. An uncomfortable conversation often ventures into the unknown. And this feels unsafe for many people. Yet the ones that show up are indeed brave. These conversations usually start out very, very awkwardly, and no one really knows what to say. Sometimes they get heated. Sometimes there's tears. There's sometimes laughter. And when things feel like they are going off track, we always come back to the person nearing end of life and what matters most for them. So a conversation I had recently with a client who's chosen VAD was around supporting their family once they have died. Again, it was a tough conversation and one worth having, because now they're comforted knowing that when they die, their family will continue to be supported by me as their end-of-life doula. And the reason that they wanted to make sure that their family was supported was because they wanted to make sure that their family didn't feel guilty or unsettled in any way because of their choice for voluntary assisted dying. They wanted to know that their family was supported through this whole process. And I will continue to support that family for as long as they need. So in these conversations, everyone gets a chance to share what they feel they need to without interruption. And we talk until everyone feels heard. And from here, we work on a plan A, which is the preferred option for end-of-life wishes. And then we work out plan B, which is often a variation of plan A, and it's the second preference. And then we work on plan C. And again, this is a variation of plan B and the third preference. But due to the unexpected, we can't cover all scenarios. However, from the 3 plans that we have, we've got a pretty good understanding of what matters most for the person, and we're able to adjust accordingly. So I have often had scenarios where we do end up with plan Z because things go astray. And we go with it, we roll with it, we have to. And we always make sure that the family is well supported and the needs of the people are met. One of my specialties as an end-of-life doula is in holistic home-based after-death care. So holistic home-based after-death care is an opportunity to care for someone physically and spiritually after death, and could be anywhere from a few hours to a few days. It can be in an aged care facility, it can be in a hospice, or it can be at home. And in my experience, families have a much healthier bereavement process when they can care for their person after death as they have so lovingly cared for them in life. Death, whether unexpected or expected, can be a really big shock. When we have the opportunity to be with our person in death, to take the time to gently wash, dress, shroud, and even coffin them, it changes the way we grieve and can be a deeply healing process. Some families may find the thought of this challenging, so we can simply sit with their person if they feel to, and they may just simply wash and moisturize their hands, or their face, or their feet, or all 3. And this is a beautiful ritual in itself, and it's quite often comforting to know that you are the last person to care for someone that is so very precious to you. If in our planning, the person has chosen a daisy box, so that's a cardboard coffin, we can take the time, weeks, even months before end of life, and engage family and friends in filling it with love through the decoration and storytelling. So some people write beautiful letters and cards to go in the daisy box. Others will decoupage it or artistically paint their daisy box. We're really only limited by our imagination on the decorating, and it's again a beautiful way to actively honor and grieve a very precious person in our worlds. Another service that I offer is planning and emceeing for memorial services. So with many people choosing direct cremation these days, I'm finding it's important for families and friends to honor their person, and they often do this by holding a memorial service. I'm very big on ceremony and ritual, so I spend time with families to ensure that the service we create aligns the person who we're holding the service for. And one of my favorite rituals was having little paper boats with little tea light candles, and having everyone in attendance take the time to light these and set them free floating on the lake where the memorial was held. It was a really windy day. The candles struggled to stay alight, and many of the little boats upturned on the water. However, it was the exact mischief that this particular person would have caused had they had the opportunity to do so. So it was very relevant to the service. So that's a little about End of Life Doula from me, and I'll now hand you back to, I think Carolyn's going to have a chat next in the conversation, so a bit more from her perspective.
Thanks, Jancine. Makes me laugh when I think about the boats turning over. It does. From one of the, let me backtrack just a mouthful. Doulas can actually fulfill a range of roles. And one of the roles that has become quite strong in the Illawarra and the Shoalhaven region is the need for death advocacy and death literacy. and to increase conversations in community. So, and in saying that, literally to create spaces where people felt comfortable, felt safe, they felt heard, they were able to come along and literally start to raise the conversations around end of life. So some of the places and some of the work that we've actually done down here has been around running conversations, death cafes in particular, in aged care, running them in library facilities with local councils, running information sessions in healthcare centres for women particularly, and also looking at interagency events. So any opportunity in community where we can be invited in to talk about end of life. You know, we plan beautifully for our births and we plan endlessly for our weddings. End of life actually deserves just as much care and love and attention. So in raising those conversations and encouraging people to feel comfortable in that space, what we're actually starting to do is to normalise that conversation. And as Helen said before, talking about it won't kill you. To allow people to actually question it and ask themselves, why is it that we don't talk about this? Where does the belief come from that says I can't do that? And let's just park that aside for a little while and have an open conversation about end of life and anything and everything that that entails for you. So a lot of the work that we have done down here has revolved around the death cafes, and we've run those as part of project work. We've run them in collaboration with our local health district. And at the moment, we're also running them in community as one-off events when community come to us and ask for those conversations. In normalising that conversation, it's giving people the opportunity to talk about anything that they want to. People come along, they share a story, they ask questions, they challenge me about why I do this work and what is it in this that, you know, what's the meaty part of this? What is it that brings me joy in contributing to community? Beautiful conversations. I've had people ask aged care staff questions along the lines of, how are you going to care for me when I'm unconscious and I'm near death? I want to know. So beautiful avenues opening up for people to have those rich, deep conversations. In normalising it, what we're then doing is saying to community, who else can you talk to about this? Who else can you share this experience with in your family, in your friends? You know, where else can this conversation be socialised? So we've been raising the conversations, we've been normalising them in community, and then encouraging anyone who comes along to those events and anyone who hears, and tonight is a classic example. There are so many people on this call tonight to be able to go away and say to family, guess what I heard last night? Do you know they talked about this and this and this? I think this about that conversation, or that's not something that I would choose. I would choose this instead. So we're starting to create opportunities for those conversations and community that allow people to discover what it is that they don't know about end of life. Now, Jancine's talked to you about the beautiful daisy box and different after-death options. If we don't ask the questions and we don't take part in these conversations and become curious, we don't get to find that information out. So that's been a real driver and a real passion for us in the Illawarra. And hopefully those conversations continue well on into community. We've got lovely interagency work coming up now where members and service providers are coming to us saying, can you please come and share with our residents? Can you please come and talk to us about end of life, advanced care planning, all sorts of topics that relate to that end of life space. And so in all of that, we're socialising that conversation and encouraging it in community. Thank you.
Beautiful. I want to acknowledge that coming up, the month of August is devoted to Dying to Know Day, and which is really what Carolyn's speaking to about socialising the conversation. And that's really, I just want to really thank Dying with Dignity and all of you for coming on and doing that. You know, and there's just a couple of things to underline. You know, we're about bridging the gaps in service provision, because there's a fact here, and this is a statistic that's out, is 95% of the time, a person who is aging or living with a diagnosis, 95% of their time, they are not in front of a doctor or a nurse. They're either alone, at home with family, friends, community, whoever, the dog, the TV, the internet, only 5% of the time are they in front of a doctor or a nurse. It's not a medical event. Doulas work in the 95%. That's where we unfurl that. And we're about giving people back choice, capacity, and control and bridging those gaps in service. And I just want to really acknowledge Dying with Dignity for, reaching into this conversation, because whether it's VAD or not, dying with dignity is everyone's right. And it's your right. And End of Life Doulas, that's what we're all about, is accompanying people, championing people, saying, you know what, this is your gig and we're here to support you. We have your back. And Shane, I'm going to give it back to you because I know there's lots of questions. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, all three of you. That was really excellent. And I'm looking forward to reading out some of these questions. So some of them were emailed to me before the webinar. But there's also been plenty in the chat, which I've copied and pasted. So we'll get started. And so that people can actually see them, I can share the screen again for the ones that we already had. So, do doulas always work with a person with a diagnosis or family as well? Who actually hires the doula? So it's 3 in 1 there.
Yeah, okay, I'll do a quick one on that.
Sure.
So basically, there are times I've worked with families where I've never met the person with the diagnosis, because not everybody wants someone in that they don't know in at a very personal, close, intimate time. However, there are times I've worked only with the family or one person in the family who says, I just want to know that I'm doing the very best thing for my mum or dad or my person or my husband or wife, but they don't really want to deal with anybody else. So no, it's not always working with the person with the diagnosis. Sometimes it's the family or another. And you know what? The other thing is I had a group of friends around a person who didn't really have much to do with their family. A group of friends got together and hired me so that I could support them, support their person. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. How do doulas get paid? Do they ever volunteer?
Some doulas volunteer. I know for me, and I'm sure Carolyn and Jancine, this is true too, there are times we do pro bono work, of course, and there are certainly times I do major discounted work as well. But here's the thing that's happening now is often it's a fee for service. So we're providing a service, people pay us, right? A rate. For example, some doulas, I'm included in this, I have an hourly rate. Like if you're just working with one-on-one per hour, maybe a couple of hours a week to give guidance and support, maybe that. Other people, I book a package of hours. So it might be a 30-hour package or whatever. But then there's also now, I've also been paid through my aged care packages, and I've also been paid through NDIS, people that have self-managed funds. So it's opening up all the time how people are being paid. And yes, we do a lot pro bono because it's not about saying no to people. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. So is there a professional body that doulas belong to?
Well, yes, we recently in the last couple of months, and we've been working on this now for a couple of years. So there is a professional body called HELD, HELD, which is Holistic End of Life and Death Care Australia. It's a not-for-profit organisation that is for membership. And so those of us that are practicing end-of-life doulas, we are joining that body because they have a code of conduct and all of those related things that someone would normally be associated with. And we hold to it, a particular code of conduct and statement of values and things like that. Yeah.
Right. And someone's asked, what about the emotional side of doulaing? Is it very sad or difficult or hard?
I've answered 3 in a row. Carolyn or Jancine, over to you.
It's a great question, actually. In terms of providing services as an end-of-life doula, one of the most important things is exquisite self-care. And also supervision. So there'll be often times that Helen and I will discuss issues, and and for me as an individual, I make sure that I always take time after an event to debrief with someone who is more experienced than I am, to have a discussion around the issues that came out of that for me personally, perhaps, to make sure that I have some time away, time with my family and time in the normal world, and time with some very valued friends. Jancine, you?
Yeah, peer support's very, very important. It can be sad and it can be hard. But I think the doula rule number one is to leave ourselves, like leave us at the door, if that makes sense. So we leave all of our, not necessarily our expectations, but we leave our, I can't even think of what the word is. We go in there with our heart open and we leave our stuff at the door. Thank you. Stuff is the right word. Yeah, we go in with open hearts.
You know, I would normally swear using that word.
We go in with open hearts and we go there for the family. We're not there for ourselves. That's what I'm saying. It's a service of humility because we're doing it for others. It's a service to others, but it does sometimes become hard and it can be sad. Yeah.
But I think the other point that I would like to make there is, you know, Carolyn shared earlier about doulaing her mother. And that's a whole other ballgame when you're doulaing someone personal and private to you in your world. But think about it, when you're doulaing someone, you know, if you like, as a client, using inverted commas, you're one step emotionally removed. And the other thing we talk about and this is what we talk about in the training a lot, is about being death comfortable, right? So, you know, I imagine that most of you, hands up, if you actually feel like you are death comfortable, you're actually comfortable talking about it, thinking about it, being, right? So there's a lot of hands up. So my point is there that as end-of-life doulas, we're about being death comfortable. Now think about it. When you're confronted by something, and I know this is true for me, when I'm confronted by something, to have someone around who's comfortable in that space, it makes me sort of go, oh, okay, all right, I'm okay, you know. And as both of the girls said, you know, we talk to each other, you know, and support each other. So peer support, and at Preparing the Way, we offer a lot of post-training support for our doulas. We really pride ourselves on that. So yeah, thank you.
And I think that this one may have already been answered, but you know, it's about how you care for the person after death, and is it legal? I'm pretty sure I was copying questions during that talk, but how do you keep the body safe? Do you want to go over that again?
I just think, Jancine, do you want to speak to that very briefly? And
Yep. It definitely is legal. So really at End of Life, there's only, you know, there's three things that are legal that we take care of. One is that, I've gone blank.
There has to be a medical certificate of cause of death.
Yep, that we legally dispose of the body and that we do everything in a legal manner. But as for caring for someone at end of life in after death, if we're doing vigil for someone for 2 or 3 days, there's ways of keeping the body cool. So we have a cooling plate. Well, I have a cooling plate. So we place that under the person and it keeps their vital organs cool. It slows down that deterioration and it keeps their body safe.
Yeah. And I think, can I just add to that too, there are other methods, so cooling plate, cooling blanket. There's also, you know, things called Techni-Ice. I've actually personally used cold brick things, you know, what do you call them, those things. I've done that as well. But as an end-of-life doula, it's about, we've got to keep the body safe, of course, and you can do it at home and you can do it legally. But here's the thing that I'm always very clear about, and I know any doulas that we train are the same, is that unless the family is willing, able to be really deeply engaged in that and being vigilant with that, then I wouldn't recommend they take care of their person at home as much as I would normally recommend that. Because honestly, the way bereavement unfolds for people, when they've been able to spend that emotional energy, take care of their person at home privately, honestly, the difference it makes doesn't take away the grief. But boy, how a person is bereaved in their bereavement, it makes a big difference, because death's always a shock. Even when we've been watching every breath for days, waiting for it to happen, it's still a shock. Why? Because we didn't choose the moment. So being able then to take the time to care for our person after death, spend our grief, because otherwise what happens normally? Person dies, they get carted off, they get put into, refrigerated area. Then the next time we see them is in the coffin at the front of a chapel. Where have we been able to spend our love and our grief? Because so often we've been caring, we're exhausted. So to be able to spend that time is a really, really important time. We advocate for it ridiculously, and it's all about keeping the body safe. Sometimes it's not safe, depending on a person's deterioration and all of that. So as Jancine said earlier, as Jackie Morgan said from Natural Grace, as individual as we are in our life, we are in our death. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. I wish my mum died over 10 years ago, and I had no idea that was possible. And after taking care of her for 7.5 months, I think it is something that our family would have contemplated.
Right, 100%.
I had no idea. It was only when I got involved with this campaign that I found out about tender funerals and different options about being able to stay with your loved one longer.
Shane, can I just add to that? I really want to address something, because this came up in a talk I did the other day. I'm doing a big End of Life Doula roadshow around the country at the moment, and I was in Orange the other day in New South Wales, and I met this group of people, and we had a little event talking about doulas and what we do, a bit like this, but less long. And there was a woman there who, as I'm talking about choice and capacity and control, and she began to cry. And I went up to her in the break and I said, are you okay if I said something that's, maybe triggered something for you? And her son, I'm not going to mention names, but her son had died 3 years earlier, and he was in his 20s. And from a cancer-related illness. And she said, oh my God, she said, everything you're talking about, I'm like, oh my God, maybe I should have given him more options. Maybe I could have done it better. Maybe I didn't do it enough. And she's crying. And I said, would you mind, please, if I share this with the group? Because you've raised a really important point and I want to address it. She said, sure. So I went back to the front of the group and I said, look, I just want to share something with you. You might have noticed that this lady is moved at the moment in tears. And so her son died, and she's now worried, right? What was she saying? And I said, here's what I want to say. And I said, and I addressed the question to her. And I said, and I used her name, and I said, so tell me, did you do everything you possibly could have at that time to take care of him, to honor him, to love him? She went, of course. I said, of course you did. You're his mum. I said, now you know things, that there are more options than you knew then. So you might do things differently now, but never better, never better. Never put that judgment on anything you've ever done around anyone, because we care about people. We always do our very best that we can. And I went up to her after the conversation and I noticed she had a little tattoo over her heart, and it was just sort of poking out. I could see the edge of it under her shirt. And I said, can I ask you a personal question? I said, is that a tattoo about your son? And she goes, and she moved a T-shirt, and what it just said was, if love, I'll never forget this, if love could have saved you, you'd live forever. And she had then the son's time of birth and date of birth and time of death and date of death under that. I said, there is your proof that you did everything you could at the time, knowing what you knew. See, education is everything. And as end-of-life doulas, that's what we talk about. We've got to educate. We've all got an obligation to talk about this, to talk about it, to socialize this conversation. Anyway, I'm getting on a roll now, Shane. Back to you.
No, that's okay. Look, obviously, a lot of people who come to our webinars and take part have been very involved with the campaign to legalise voluntary assisted dying. I know, obviously, you, Helen, you're in Victoria. And
I've dealt with it a number of times.
In Queensland, we've still got 4 months until the New South Wales law takes effect. But
November 28th.
28, that's right. So what if a person is accessing voluntary assisted dying? Can a doula help there?
Gosh. I just want to say yes. Look, I've worked with a few families in Victoria, and I know Jancine's also got experience here. She was sharing previously, and so I'll get you to chime in a sec, Jancine. Voluntary assisted dying is about making a choice about the moment that death occurs, right? So, and if you look at our 10 stages, death was around the middle. Death was about stage 6. There's a whole lot that comes after it, and there's a whole lot that becomes before it. Jancine shared in her story about all of the conversations and the concerns. I've worked with families in Melbourne, in Victoria, not only Melbourne, but in Victoria where I normally live. And the conversations, there's so much support for the person and resources and education and support for the person and maybe their primary person. You know what I see lacking a lot in the education is for support for family and friends and people close. So that's where so much of the work that I do is about. One family we had all these conversations about, well, where are they going to do it? Because they were being cared for in a faith-based hospital. And the faith-based hospital was saying, well, no, you can't do it here. Now, I don't believe that can happen anymore. I think that's now been dealt with, that a place can't refuse you. But nevertheless, at the time, we had to find another place. But then they were saying, well, we're going to do it in an Airbnb. I'm like, well, that could be a problem, because that could be, what if neighbours see a dead person leaving? Like, okay. Oh, well, we're going to do it. We don't want to do it at home because of the children. Do you know what I'm saying? That we had conversation after conversation after conversation after conversation to work out what was the best result for their family. Do you get what I'm saying? Yep. No one else has those conversations that I know of. Certainly not. Our care navigators, I have to say, hands up, great. Really do a great job. However, they're not there every step of the way. With this particular family I was working with, or one particular one, they had 2 autistic children. And they were like, well, how do we manage that? And how do we navigate that? And again, I involve Natural Grace. And I have to say, thank God for Natural Grace and the holistic funeral approach, because they created a whole room that the children could go in and out and be with their dad in, but not and be in the bean bags and have all of the tools they needed to support them. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was, we did so much work, and so little, this much was around the actual death, about VAD, was all around the family and this stuff. Anything you want to add to that, Jancine?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's very much, especially with my experience, about supporting the family around the person that's choosing voluntary assistance.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Thank you both. This one is from a lady who says, I am a 70-year-old single woman, an only child, no family or relatives, so I have to organise everything about my life and death. I'm currently in good health, so hopefully my death is sometime in the future, but who knows? How could I arrange an end-of-life doula in advance? I live in rural Victoria.
Well, I'm very proud to say that Preparing the Way has end-of-life doulas almost everywhere, and I'm about to do a regional Victoria tour anyway. So I know that, Shane, you're going to be sending out the review tomorrow, aren't you, or whenever you send it in the next few days, and you're going to put in, I think, a page. But bottom line is, we have a find a doula option on our website, Preparing the Way, preparingtheway.com.au, and I know Shane will share that, so that'll come tomorrow. But yes, absolutely, 100%, an end-of-life doula would absolutely sit with you, work through the planning you need to do so that you know you've got everything in place, and can be there with you, support you in any way that works for you. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
Right. And this is from the same person. Is there a central doula database which tells me their qualifications? For example, are they a nurse, etc., years of experience, if they service my area, and costs?
So central database No, not for all doulas. There is a website called www.endoflifedouladirectory.com.au, and that has many doulas on it. You can click on your state. There's many preparing the way doulas on. There's many doulas trained by other people. There's also a great section there about what you should be asking an end-of-life doula if you're going to be hiring someone. So that's a possibility. But the other thing is what we do at Preparing the Way, like if someone contacted us, we would get a little bit of an outline of, okay, tell us a little bit what the situation is, where is the person, and then we look at doulas in that area and we look for a match-up. So that's what we do at Preparing the Way, and that's an option. But the other thing about that is where, depending on what you want and what you need, is it for the person themselves? Is it for the family? And a lot of doulas, because of COVID, of course, we've all had to learn to work remotely. I work with people in America and overseas, and I do it. It's all like this on Zoom. So do you know what I'm saying? Even if there's not someone in your immediate area, we can absolutely link you up to have the people that are going to support you. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think you've already, this same woman has asked about the scale of costs for doulas and are they regulated? You've covered that earlier in the webinar. And I think you also did mention the question, are the costs covered by health funds? You mentioned the NDIS and
so health funds, like we're talking health insurance, like, you know, NB or NIB and all of those sort of things. Not yet, but Preparing the Way 2 years ago, we have the world's only nationally accredited end-of-life doula training, of which Jancine and Carolyn are both participating in that training at the moment and will graduate come a bit after February. And that's the very first time. And it's the only one in the world nationally accredited. So now that we have that up and running, we've just started our second intake on that, that now we have that up and running. Part of my role as you know, at Preparing the Way as director up there is now one of my goals next year of 2024 is, now that we've got the Cert 4 up and rolling, we now have a qualification, is to now go and start lobbying. And now we've got HELD, the professional body, as well, I was talking about earlier, now to go and start lobbying healthcare companies, and also the government to get, can we get a Medicare provider number? Do you know, like, it's got to happen. But you know what? Here's the thing. This is an emerging role in Australia. It's all around the world, internationally, America, UK, Canada, Europe, all well established. And we're a little bit behind the 8 ball here, but the momentum is definitely building. And putting the Cert 4 together, that was putting a stake in the ground. We now have a international actually qualification. So that's a game changer. So now we can start going, and now we've got HELD behind us as well, because we've got a professional body that can be our voice. And think about it, it's not only for doulas. Any of you who are interested in holistic end-of-life and after-death care in Australia, get on there. You can become like a friend member, you know, for $20 or something. I don't know, it's not a lot. Just, but because you know what, the more voices we have, the more power we have. Because, you know, I just really want to say, end-of-life care in Australia, it's up to us. It's not up to the government. The government, most states are bust. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, come on. We as a collective, we have to do this. You know, as a community, we got to do this, and we can if we band together. Yeah.
Great, thank you. How can we best, so now I'm going to move to the ones that were in the chat earlier. Roy asked, are there any standards or accreditation for people practicing as doulas? But I feel you've covered that question. Yep. Someone also asked about, do doulas have to do a police check?
What part of being a member of HELD, and also what we recommend to all of our doulas, is we need to have professional public liability and indemnity insurance. That we do police checks, we do working with children's checks, you know, what state we're in. Yeah, we've got a code of conduct. And look, even if a person wasn't a member of HELD, and HELD actually requires that we have all of those things, there's and it's the unregistered, someone help me, unregistered healthcare professional. So doctors, nurses, and some allied health are registered by a company or a group called agency called APRA. And that's a professional group, and they've got a code of conduct and all of that. So we're non-registered, right? So there is a code of conduct to government. We train all of our people that's the code they have to do. It's about privacy and confidentiality and all of those normal things that if you're in a business, you've got to do. So of course we do that. Well, that's what we train at Preparing the Way. I can't speak for other organizations, but that's what we do. Yeah.
Yeah. We've only got 15 minutes left, so I'll run through them fairly quickly. But as I said, I think you've covered a lot of these anyway. But this is an unusual one. So from Susie, how can we best get the information of deathbed visions and such into nursing homes? I've had so many problems with my mum's experiences not being understood by staff.
Oh, wow, Susie. What a great question. And I'm going to get Carolyn to speak to this as well in a moment. But one of the things I want to let you know is happening. So we've got, as I said, we've got the Cert 4. And in New South Wales, which is where most of you are, I'm assuming, we've recently been funded, because we work in collaboration with a registered training organisation called Essential Skills, and they're based in Newcastle region. And they are the people who put on our course. And recently the government, New South Wales government, has funded a pilot of 16 places in aged care, of 16 staff from an aged care facility around that area, to do training in 2 of our Cert 4 units, one on palliative care and one on active dying. And that is about, in that training that I delivered up there for their staff, and they've now asked, they want that training to go everywhere. The government has also now funded other units, other companies to deliver those units as well. So my point being, Susie, that it's coming. And I understand the heartache that it causes when people aren't hearing you, because that's really what all of this is about. But the government is sitting up. We've actually been invited to put in, a submission for more funding. So, look, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of funding because it can be cut like that. But I just want you to know that we are delivering those units and training. And come talk to us, Susie. Email us, and I know Shane will send out the email tomorrow with contacts. Contact us. If we can help you advocate, if we can speak to that place, we'll do that. Carolyn, do you want to quickly add anything?
Look, Helen, the only thing I think probably that I do on top of that is just continually talk with staff and talk with families and encourage that information to be shared, and saying how beautiful it is, and teaching people how to just continue those conversations with residents.
Yeah.
What was that like? Tell me what you saw. Who else was there? So it's open-ended questions that welcome that person's experience. Yeah. It's not up to us to judge. It's not up to us to disclaim. It's part of their journey, and that's to be honoured.
Yeah, 100%. And staff, generally speaking, when I did this training in Newcastle recently, the people that sat there, they wanted to know. These staff wanted to know, because you know what? So many people are scared of a death conversation. And these staff, and there was a few RNs, but most of them were care support staff, right? And they called themselves I canned that pretty quick. I said, you're the ones actually dealing with people. But they were the ones who were there talking with people every day. And so training them, and they came back the next week for session 2, and then a few weeks later for session 3. And they came back and they were like, oh my God, it worked. I was so excited because they felt empowered. Remember the word I was saying earlier, being death comfortable. Being death comfortable. We've got to train, and we've got to get the government to help fund this. And it's like what your organisation is doing, Shane, and I'm Penny, that it's about helping people get death comfortable and advocating for this education everywhere. And I don't mean doula education specifically, but I mean active dying, what happens to people, and having people be comfortable talking about it. It's critical.
Right. Tim asked about how do we find a doula. I think that's been covered. But I just want to say also, if any of the questions that I rush through now so that we can finish at 6:30, if you feel that the question wasn't answered, please email me, after the webinar, and I'll make sure that we send them on to Helen, Jancine, and Carolyn. So I apologise if we're skimming over things and you don't feel it was answered. The next one from Jacqueline was the same. What qualifications do you need to become a doula? I think we've covered.
Can I please answer that? That's an important one.
Yeah, I thought it was no. If you feel there's more to add to that, then
way more. You do not need any qualifications to become an end-of-life doula. Yes, we've got the Cert 4. Yes, we've got our foundation workshop and our intensive course, and they are what those two, foundation workshop and intensive course, which is equivalent of sort of 5 days. That's enough. That's certainly what Carolyn did and Jancine did, along with other courses they may have done. But the reality is this: there are incredible end-of-life doulas out there that have done no official training. Some people do this organically. Some people have just fallen into it. My point is this: you don't need a qualification, but it depends what your goals are. If you want to work in particular industries, if you want to work in hospitals, it's like anything. If you think about it, this is an emerging industry. It is going to get tighter over time. And I'm not saying you have to do this course. Please, I'm not saying that. But to start, you need a heart. You need the willingness to be committed to making a difference to individuals, and the willingness to learn and become death comfortable even more than you already are. That's where you start. You don't need to be a nurse. You don't need any qualifications to start. Start with the foundation workshop if you're going to do anything. Yeah.
That's a great answer. So I'm glad you did that one.
Yeah, that was important.
Yeah. Kerry asked, at stage 10, family is required to deal with so much administration. Can a doula help facilitate that, perhaps with a legal team?
Yes. Do any of you girls want to jump in, Carolyn? I can address it too.
No, only to say that I know of doulas who have done that, and very successfully. I've done it for people as well. It's about making sure that you're part of those early discussions, that families are aware of your presence and the role that you're playing in that, and that's defined very clearly so that families understand. And I'm aware of, for example, some people who have no family whatsoever, no remaining family, and they have actually employed a doula to close their estate off after. So that meant that they were the person who engaged with the solicitor. They became the executive for the estate. They wound that person's affairs up completely and sold property.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of experiences from this end of the spectrum to the other. Yeah.
And I think one of the things, look, and I'll just be really straight up with you, one of the things that Preparing the Way, we actually, say to people, be very careful about what legal arrangements you enter into, because it's not our role. We are, if you like, an engaged service. And I generally, unless I know the person personally, I would not enter into that, just myself. But here's the thing. Yes, I have worked with people that I don't, if you like, have their legal representation. I'm not their power of attorney, or I'm not their whatever. However, I have been alongside them and their family after they've died, supporting that process to happen. Does that make sense? I've been there actually guiding them as they're doing that and just supporting them. Just going, what, you've got this, what needs to happen now? Okay. And helping, because sometimes when people are in grief, your brain's scrambled, you're lucky to even have a straight thought. Do you know what I mean? So to have someone there who can go, all right, what's the next step? What's the next step? And just accompany. And that's why I mean about care for the living, accompanying people on that remaining journey. Shane?
Jan asks, what happens if the loved one has an advanced care directive? doesn't want to suffer at all in the, or during the active dying stage while on comfort care, and the doctor allows aged care staff to decide whether to administer morphine or agitation medication. This is different from what's in the advanced care directive, leading the loved one to suffer.
Wow, there we go. So unfortunately, this is a conversation that comes up a lot. When I'm in that situation as an end-of-life doula, if I'm engaged with that family, that person, I am the one advocating for, and I'm sure Jancine and Carolyn would both stick your hand up if you agree with me, or don't if you don't, but we would be the ones there going to the nursing staff, going to the doctor, and I've even gone right up the top to the NUM, to the nurse union manager, and to the director of nursing, going, excuse me, see this advanced care directive? We need to be following this. And it's not about going in there and being elbows and all of that. It's about collaborative work. And I find that generally speaking, there's a lot of times that people are following a process or a protocol. They're not following a human being and their journey. Does that make sense? So sometimes what I'm doing, and they're saying, oh, well, the patient, and I go, oh, you mean Betty? Is that who you're talking about? Or Mrs. Jones? Can we use their name, please? They're not just a patient, they're actually a person, and this is their family. So that's sometimes, honestly, sometimes that's all it takes to have people go, oh, that's right, I'm dealing with a person here. Because they're in a whirl of their own things. Carolyn, Jancine, anything you would add to that?
The thing that comes to mind for me, Helen, is the situations I've found that occurring in. Staff's response to me has been along the lines of, we don't want them to become addicted to the medication. We've had those conversations around, do we understand that this person is actually actively dying? And it's not going to be an issue of addiction. This is about an issue of comfort.
Yeah.
They've gone away and thought about it, spoken to the doctors, and then the situation has changed. Yeah. So it's just needed someone to go, hang on a sec, what's the purpose?
Reality check, people. Yeah.
What is the purpose? Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's it. We're keeping people aligned with what a person's comfort levels are and their choices. And that's why it's so important to have your advanced care directives in place, because, if you don't, someone else is going to make those decisions for you. And that's really critical. Yeah.
Great. There were, Grace asked a question, but I don't think we're going to have time with only 2 minutes to go, but there have been a few topics. People have asked questions specifically about voluntary assisted dying. I think we'll leave that to the next. We're having a webinar in October, so apologies, but I think we'll stick to the doulas for this particular webinar. That also goes, for another question. But I think you might have, how many clients do you have like at one time? Has that been asked?
Oh, there's the piece of string question, Sharon. It's like, when are they going to die? That's one of the pieces of string. And then the other one is how many clients? Because here's the reality. Sometimes, like with a birth, when you're a birth doula, you've sort of got a 9 or 10 month or even 11 month sort of period, you're looking at pre, during and post birth. End of life, it's a whole thing. I've worked with people for 5 days. I've worked with people for 2 days. I've worked with people only after death. When I've had sudden traumatic deaths, I might come in when a suicide's happened or when something's happened, and then I'm with the families after that. There are other times that I've worked with people who got they called me the day after diagnosis, and this is one of the people that is very prevalent. I teach a lot about this situation, and I end up working with them for 2.5 years. But I'm not like with them all the time. Like there were times they're having treatment, I'm so backed off. So there is no answer to that question. I've had up to 10, 15 at a time, but sometimes I might not be talking to them. I've also had one at a time because I'm so intense. So, yeah.
Right. Well, look at the time, it's 6:30. I'm sure we could keep going for another half an hour at least, but we do promise people that we'll stick to the hour and a half. It's been an absolute fabulous sort of discussion, so thank you so much. And I know you a few times, Helen, you mentioned that I'll have the email and the recording out tomorrow. I won't have it out tomorrow.
No, when you do, I did correct myself. I said when you do.
So hopefully within the next week, and I will definitely put the link to the Preparing the Way website and any other information that Jancine and Carolyn and Helen would like me to provide in that email to everyone. So on behalf, I don't know whether Penny would like to say, our president, Penny Hackett, is there. And is there anything you'd like to say, Penny, before we close the meeting tonight?
Well, I do want to thank you, ladies, because I always knew this was going to be an excellent session, and I've felt for some time that End of Life Doulas are an important piece of the puzzle, because the sense of abandonment that an awful lot of people, dying people and their families, feel at the end is, felt that myself with the death of a friend, that there is sort of literally no safety net there for families and loved ones that have never navigated this before. So having a patient advocate and someone there to provide that sort of wraparound support is just vital, and the medical system does not provide that. So I can see just from the comments that people have found this to be excellent, and I've got 5 people already who've expressed an interest in training, so I'll be in touch with them. We're going to work very hard to build your network, because I think that helps our supporters a great deal as well.
So I think so too.
Marvelous.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Penny.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you for all our participants. And as I said, you've all registered, so I will email you the link to the recording. But of course, you can look at all of our recordings. They're on the Dying with Dignity website as well. I put them as a banner across the homepage, and you can just click there, and then it'll take you to our YouTube channel. So enjoy the rest of your evening. I know Go Gentle Australia has a webinar starting in half an hour. So for those of you who have registered, that was a bit of a mistake. They have apologized. They sort of got the email out without realizing that we had one on the same night. So anyway, time for a quick early dinner between the two. And if not, yeah, I'm sure that'll be recorded as well. So good night, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody. Good night.